a lesson, and 2,000 years of Jew hatred will not come back because we are much more intelligent than that. And boy, was I wrong. I'm lucky to be born in that era, but since the 7th of October, that bubble that we lived in has now exploded, and it's gone. And as I say, the good old Jew hatred is back. Now I'm going to take us on a history of anti-Semitism, or Jew hatred, as it was called. Anti-Semitism is a very new word. So I'm going to go through this quickly, and I presume it's better to listen than to look at the so how does this work? Why doesn't it? There? No? Why can't I share? Okay, so history's oldest hatred is the Jew hatred. And in spite of being 0.2% of the world's population, I repeat, 0.2. If you were a Martian and you read the headlines on in today's newspapers, or watched social media, or watched news on television, you would think that the Jews, the 0.2% of the world's population, would rather be something like 50% of the world's population. Because they are mentioned so often, they are blamed so many times for so many different things. So it's quite astounding. It's astonishing that it's still alive and kicking, and it woke up and sort of shook off the shame of the Holocaust, and it's now back on track, roaring as ever. So it is history's most persistent and changing expression of hostility towards a minority. Why? Because it changes with time, and it adopts, and it will take on what is most important in that specific time and blame the Jews for abusing what is most important. And if we go back here, so just a second, I'm just going to change there we go. So a short timeline for those who today, in today's woke media and today's news, they sort of believe everything happened on 7th of October. Of course, you guys know much better. But so I'm starting very, very quickly. I'll go through. I've highlighted some of the most terrible highlights of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred in history. And when does it really start? Well, that's an argument that we can have. I started with 93 AD, where we had the first documented blood libel. Now, of course, the Greeks didn't like the Jews. They invaded Judea and so forth, and the Babylonians. But that wasn't so much about Jew hatred. That was just empires invading people, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, there will be people who disagree with me. But the first documented blood libel. Now, what's a blood libel? It is what becomes known in the Christian world as Jews needing Christian blood from Christian children to make their matzah bread for Passover. And that's why it's called a blood libel. Now, a blood libel is not only that, it's about all kinds of different accusations that Jews have been exposed to. So the Egyptian writer Appian. Now, Appian doesn't sound very Egyptian. Maybe he was Greek. A Greek ruled then in Egypt. And he actually wrote that Jews captured Greeks, fattened them up. This is like Hansel and Gretel. Then sacrificed them in a temple and ate their internal organs while swearing hatred against the Greeks. So the Greeks were at the time the rulers of Egypt. So this is the first blood libel, where Jews are accused of actually using blood for their religious ceremonies. Now, anyone who knows anything about Judaism knows that blood is a big no-no. In Judaism, we don't eat anything that that is made from blood. Like I'm originally from Sweden, where we eat blood pudding. It's pudding made of blood. That would never work here in Israel. And even when we slaughter Jews, we do it in a kosher way, so to drain the animal of its blood. Blood is a big no-no. Then we go on, and we have a church father who becomes very influential. His name is John Chrysostom, and he writes a very famous book that will be picked up by the church and revered by the church in history and through times, and it's called Adversus Judaeus. Adversus Judaeus, against the Jews. And there he accuses Jews of killing Jesus. And that's it. This is 386 in Antioch. And from then on, killing Jesus, meaning killing God. The Jews will be accused of deicide, which is killing God. I just go through this quickly. In 628 in Khaybar in Arabia. And why did I take that? Because when you today will see a demonstration of pro-Palestinians and anti-Israelis, mainly pro-Palestinians, you will hear the following chant many times. Khaybar, Khaybar, ya Yahud, Yaish Muhammad, Sof Yahud. Meaning, Khaybar, Khaybar, O Jews, Muhammad's army will return. And with that, it's the connotation of what happened in Khaybar in 628, when Muhammad came, slaughtered the Jews, slaughtered the men, took the women and children as slaves, and stole all their belongings. And we're talking about thousands of Jews. So when we hear that, when Jews hear that, they know that now the people chanting that is coming for their blood. In 637 in the Holy Land, the Muslims have conquered the Holy Land, and now they are not allowing Jews to build any new synagogues, and they must pray silently. They must wear a yellow badge on their clothes for identification. And they are forbidden to ride horses. They're forbidden to hold judicial and civil offices. So the yellow badge, here we go, 637 in the Holy Land, now conquered by Muslims. 642 in 42 in Hijaz, Arabia, the Caliph Omar expels all the Jews from Hijaz, where they have lived for hundreds of years, because we must remember when the Romans conquered the Holy Land, Judea, Samaria, they eventually threw out not all the Jews, but most of the Jews. They were not allowed to practice their religion. And of course, many of them fled after 135 to the area nearby. And the area nearby is what today is Saudi Arabia. And many Jews live there. So, but when the Muslims take over Saudi Arabia, that was a polytheistic area, they were thrown out. And until today, Jews, if you're a Jew, you're not allowed into Saudi Arabia. When my mother worked in Saudi Arabia in the 1990s, 1990 till 1992, she could not write on her application that she had a daughter who is Jewish and who lives in Israel. So she had to deny my existence in order to work in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh. In the 9th century in Mesopotamia, that's today's Iraq, the Jews were forced to wear a yellow badge on their clothes. So here we go again, the yellow badge. And Christians were forced to wear a blue badge, sometimes a red badge. So it's not only the Jews under Islam, it's also the Christians. In 1033 in Fez, Morocco, 6,000 Jews were massacred in a massacre, because every so often we will go and kill the Jews. 1096 in Germany, the first crusade that goes through there. And there is an enormous massacre of Jews in Mainz, Worms, and Speyer. And why? Because they were just happened to be in the way. 1144 in Norwich, England. There we have Jews accused of a ritual murder of a Christian child. So here's the first blood libel that we know of in England, and there is violence against the Jews. Yemen, 1215 in Rome, 1290 in England. England expels all the Jews by a royal edict. 1336 Germany, Armleder massacre of Jews in over 120 communities, with thousands of Jews killed. The Black Death in Europe, of course, the Jews were blamed for that. So in Worms, which is today's Germany, they burnt 4,000 Jews. Spain, 1391, massacre of Seville, Valencia, thousands killed. 1516, Venice, here is the first ghetto. It's officially established and it gets its name, ghetto. So that's an Italian name. 1648 to 1657, which is about, 9 years. It's the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and they kill 50 to 100,000 Jews by Cossacks. Cossacks kill 50 to 100,000 Jews. I mean, it's enormous number of people being killed, also considering that the populations in those days were much smaller. So in 1791, Russia, they expelled the Jews to what is going to be called the Pale of Settlements. And at its peak, this Pale of Settlements, which is Poland, Lithuania, and that part of former Eastern Europe, we had 4.9 million Jews. And this Pale of Settlement existed until 1917. And this is also the area that later is going to be cleansed of its Jews by Hitler. 1837, the Holy Land, for a month, the Arab Muslims attack Jews who are massacred, homes are looted, women raped, and synagogues desecrated. 1837, there was no Palestine, there was no conflict between Arabs. Well, there was a conflict, Jews, but Jews didn't have the strength, they didn't have an army, they didn't have a land. 1894, very famous Dreyfus affair in France, which is when Herzl realizes he's covering this event that happens in Paris. He realizes that Jews will never be accepted in the diaspora. And he starts what is today known as political Zionism, meaning whatever we do, whatever the Jews do, they will not be accepted, even into a tolerant society such as France, which gave them, emancipated them in the 1791. We must have our own country in order for us to survive as a people, as a religion, as a nation, and we need to go back to our former country. So that was born out of a very strong anti-Semitic act where Dreyfus was falsely accused of spying or betraying the French army. He was a lieutenant in the French army. He was Jewish and he was sentenced to Death's Island. He was later exonerated, but I don't remember how many years he was there. There are actually many famous movies about this story. 1903, another very important event in modern day anti-Zionism, anti-Judaism, anti-Israelism, is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a fiction written by the Russian secret police, Tsar Nicholas II, secret police, and it incited violence against Jews because it's full of Jewish conspiration, Jews will take over the world, etc., etc. And there were many reasons why this was written. And this book will become a bestseller in the Arab world, not at this time, but a bit later on, together with Mein Kampf. In Ukraine, 1919 to 1921, pogroms of Jews, and over 100,000 Jews were murdered, slaughtered. And when I say 100,000 Jews, I'm talking about Jews who have no civil rights. They cannot defend themselves. They are all civilians, and they can, just like sheep, be slaughtered. 1933 to 45, we have Germany and the the rise of the Nazis and Hitler, and of course 6 million Jews are murdered in the Holocaust. In 1946, a year after the Second World War has ended, there is a blood libel about ritual murder, and 40 Jews in Poland are murdered and dozens are injured. In 1946. So this, of course, leads to mass immigration from Eastern Europe in general. And at the time, we had the mandate, the United Nations, it wasn't United, at the time it was United Nations mandate of Palestine. So many tried to flee here. Of course, they were not allowed entry by the British. 1948 to 53, the Soviet Union, and this is I haven't seen it in any articles. No one has talked about it unless you really look for this information. Joseph Stalin planned another Holocaust only 8 years after the first Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were exterminated. And he plans this in Russia, or the Soviet Union, sorry. Now, the only reason this did not happen is because he died in 1953. Had he not died in 1953, there would have been another Holocaust, number 2, in former Soviet Union. 1975, the UN resolution is adopted, which says Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. And from here on, this is what we hear on the world stage today. This is what we hear by young university students chanting on the streets of the Western world. Of course, it's only in the Western democratic world you have such blatant demonstrations, because only in the Western democratic world will they be allowed. So eventually in 2023, 7th of October, we have the genocidal massacre of Jews in Israel. And it's the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust at all, in general. There has not been such an event since the Holocaust, and it happened in Israel. Now, since then, between October 7th, 2023 till the October 1st, 2025, almost 2 years, there were 13,339 anti-Semitic incidents globally reported against Jews and Israel. 13,339. So October 7th sort of released the genie out of the bottle. And this genie is very scary and not a very pleasant one. So what do we have? Let's go into the different adaptations of Jew hatred. And I'm talking about Jew hatred because that's what it was called in the beginning. Deicide, when the Jews were accused of killing God. Now, my book is about institutionalized Jew hatred. And deicide becomes institutionalized within the early church. And that follows up and until 1964, was it 1965, I think it was, when the Catholic Church had its Nostra Aetate decree, where they said that Jews are actually not guilty of killing God. But it took them to almost 2,000 years. So what does this do, this accusation that the Jews killed Jesus, which is God? It makes them, it's a historical event. I mean, we can read about it in the Bible, but it's also a cosmic sin. It's something that it's the worst of all. You cannot commit a worse sin And if we talk about history now, so in those days, you couldn't commit a worse sin. So the Jews were the worst of the worst, or the lowest of the lowest, so to speak. So John Chrysostom, that I already mentioned, he portrayed Jews as devilish, impious, God killers, responsible for all evil in the world. And his sermons became standard for a rhetoric that demonized Jews as eternal enemies of Christianity. Now, this is ongoing. It's not an ongoing massacre. It has peaks, but this led to a terrible history in Jewish history. So the Jews are responsible for the greatest cosmic sin, and this places the Jews outside of humanity. And if the Jews are outside of humanity, this is a breeding ground for centuries of violence and discrimination. I mean, you're not committing a sin if you discriminate against the Jews, if you are violent against the Jews, because they're not even human. And it also created a us and them structure. So the theology became a tool for social and political control in the church, and it stayed on in the church, a foundation for institutionalized Jew hatred. Now, what we must remember is that, so here we have it, it's the Second Vatican Council declaration, Nostra Aetate, in 1965. That is when the Catholic Church officially distanced itself from the idea that Jews were collectively responsible for Jesus' death, without mentioning the word deicide. Now, what we must remember, in the first 1800 years of Christianity, when people went to church, or 1700 years, most of them could not read. So they would listen to the priest, they would look at the paintings and the art in church. And in something that developed in Europe, still in existence, is what is called the Judensau, which it's German for the sow of the Jews, or Jews' sow. And if you look at this, I don't know if you can see here, but here is the pig, and the Jews are suckling on its teats. So I mean, so they're not even humans. So even if you couldn't read, you would not miss what the church thought about the Jews in the early days. And as I said, this picture is from Sweden. It's from it's from one of the major churches in Uppsala, Sweden, and it's still there. The Judensau. We have many churches in Sweden, fairly many, where we have the Judensau. It's mainly in Lutheran Europe, so it's Germany, Sweden. I don't know if they have them in Norway and Denmark, but in Sweden definitely. So that was deicide, that institutionalized the possibility of Jew hatred and discrimination and violence against Jews. Now, then we have replacement theology. That is like the step number 2. This also happens fairly early. So the church father Augustine in 354 to 430, he institutionalized hatred against Jews on a structural level, because what he emphasized was that the Jews have now, the church has replaced Israel as God's chosen, meaning, so if the Jews were Israel, now they are not any longer chosen. The church has replaced them, but we need them alive. We need them to exist as proof for the church claim of truth, and also to prove that the Old Testament, that the old scriptures were actually true, and that they had happened and they existed. So the history of the Jewish people is seen as consumed and surpassed by Christian history of salvation. So the Jews are out, but we need them to be there in order to prove our new replacement theology. Now, so this theological construction had two consequences. First of all, it reduced Jews to evidence what happened if you do not accept the truth of Christianity. So therefore, Jews could never become full members of a Christian society. And I'm of course talking about Europe here. And secondly, replacement theology legitimized a wide range of social and legal restrictions. So you could do what you did, whatever you wanted to the Jews. You wouldn't be punished because you weren't dealing with humans as such, and you were dealing with people who had killed God and they have now been replaced. So there was no fault in any kind of, and this is institutionalized, we must remember. So Jews were always defined as a permanent counterpoint to society. So if the society was Christian at the time, they are the counterpoint, and etc. I will come to it later. So they had, of course, special laws that against the Jews, and they couldn't work in certain professions, and they were only allowed to work in special professions, specifically one that had to do with money. Money was dirty. Of course, Jews became very good at handling money and etc. etc. So bankers later today and in the 100 years ago, we have lots of famous Jewish bankers. Now, so they were forced to live in special places, in ghettos, and wear badges, etc., etc. Martin Luther, which opposed the church, which was then Catholic, he was in the very beginning, he's the father of the Reformation. He was in the beginning positive towards the Jews because he opposed the church in Rome, or the Pope in Rome. But then he got criticized for that, and he changed, and he became what he wrote became blatantly anti-Semitic or blatant anti-Jew hatred. So he wrote a book or a thesis on the Jews and their lies. And he proposed that Jewish synagogues should be burnt, their scriptures confiscated, their rabbis forbidden to teach, and their homes destroyed. And his blatant anti-Jewish stance was later on frequently quoted both by Stalin, Nazi Germany. I mean, anyone who had a thing against the Jews, they would quote Martin Luther. Now, Islam and the Jews. So Islam and the Jews has a very dark history. It has never, ever been a love story. And we have to understand from the area in which Islam develops. It's an area of Bedouins. It's an area where the tribe is important. It's an area which has a harsh climate, the desert, hot at night and hot in the day and cold at night. And it lacks resources. Now, in this type of climate, in your tribe, you have to be very, very careful. You cannot afford to have to waste your resources. So, and you need the tribe to stick together. So you have one tribal leader, which will be the chieftain of the tribe, and in that tribe, everything has to work like with ants. You're not allowed to criticize the tribe because that would cause mayhem in the tribe, and that mayhem would cause the tribe to be extinguished because you're in this harsh climate and you have no resources. Now, this is the climate, this is the environment where Islam develops. But not only, it's also the environment of Jews and Christians, because they lived when Muhammad preached his new religion. He was very much influenced, first of all, by Jews, secondly, by Christians. And he was therefore, in the beginning, accused of plagiarism. And he would say, why don't you join me in this new religion? And people say, well, why would we join you? You just call yourself a prophet. You're not a prophet. You have just taken what is already written in the Jewish books and in the Christian books. Now, the word Islam means submission. And that is, whoever submits to the rules of this religion receives peace and protection from the new tribe. And what is the new tribe? It's the global Ummah, all the followers of Islam. That is why if today you insult a Muslim, wherever it is in the world, the global Ummah must revenge that insult. And revenge in this part of the world is done with blood, meaning they have to be killed. That is the rule of, that's the name of the game, and that is why we have honor killings and such like, because you must never ever question the leader. And we see this all over the Muslim Middle East world, which has now migrated to both America and to the USA, to all over the Western global hemisphere. So Muhammad was born in 570 AD in Mecca. It was a polytheistic environment with Jewish presence and Christian presence. Judaism influenced Muhammad. The people of Mecca did not accept him as a prophet. They accused him of plagiarizing. And when he left in 622, he had not gained followers. But after he leaves and he moves to Medina, which is not so far away, he does get a following. And now he becomes strong because he also gets soldiers, an army. He gathers an army. And now, when he is stronger, the Jews, the mere existence of the Jews, they pose a theological threat, including the one of plagiarism and the delegitimization of Islam, because if he's accused of plagiarism, so what is Islam in this case? So Muhammad needs to distance himself from the Jews, and he does this in different ways. So Muslims are advised not to associate with Jews. Jews have to pay a head tax, jizya, in order to have the right to live. Head tax, meaning you pay for your head, otherwise, so it will stay in between your shoulders. If you don't pay it, your head is cut off. That's what jizya means. And it's practiced until this day in the Muslim world. Jews were dehumanized and also called monkeys and pigs, even in the scripture. Jews were given a dhimmi status, which is a subordinate status within Islam, just as Christians have a dhimmi status. Now, this dhimmi status for Jews and Christians, who are called the people of the book, there's kind of a respect you have. You have the possibility to pay jizya, and then you're allowed to live. Other religions, they're not even considered humans, and they can be killed or used as slaves or whatever without even thinking about it. But Jews and Christians, they are dhimmi people because they are the people of the book. So, in other words, Jews had exhausted their rights and would be treated accordingly as inferior, full stop. And that is why we see this anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic stance in the Arab world, dominating the Arab world. Not all countries or governments, but in most of the Arab world. And that, of course, goes for the Jewish state as well. So Jews are mentioned 10 times in the Quran, the word. Children of Israel, 40 times, over 40 times. People of the book, which is Jews and Christians, but here with the connotation to Jews, over 30 times. Jerusalem is not mentioned at all in the Quran. So this is a problem for today's Muslims. So what do? They want to make a differentiation between the word Jews and the children of Israel. So Jews are considered a religious group, not a nation, and they were the people who lived among the Muslims at the time. They do not exist anymore. The children of Israel were considered an ethnic group, mythological people who no longer existed. So Jews do exist, but not the children of Israel mentioned in the Quran. They might never even have existed. So here is how Islam today tries to discuss away the importance of Israel and the children of Israel and the Jews who actually came from here. So anti-Judaism in Islam is because Judaism threatens the validity of the Quran. Because if the Jews come and restore the Jewish state, and again starts praying at the Temple Mount, they are reviving something that started 3,000 years ago. And the Jewish state today is the third independent Jewish state in history. 3,000 years ago with King David, with the Maccabees, 2,200 years ago, 167 BC, and now 1948, the Jewish state of Israel. That is a theological threat to Islam. So the institution, so the Jews in Islam, or Jew hatred in Islam, is institutionalized in order to protect Islam. It's a theological threat with the Jews and the state of Israel and the independent Jewish state of Israel. Now, moreover, land that has once was Muslim, it's called Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, can never become anything else. And for hundreds of years, Muslims occupied what is today Israel. So since the Muslims occupied it, of course it cannot become Jewish now or anything else. And I'll give another example, which is not right now occupied by Muslims, and that is Spain. Spain, Andalusia, that was occupied by Muslims for hundreds of years and taken back by the Inquisition or the Reconquista in the 14th century, 14th or 13th century. It is still considered Muslim land, and they just have to take it back. So Israel is, of course, also considered Muslim land, and it has to be taken back and not lost. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a new organization, started in 1928 in Egypt. It took all the bad things of Islam and made a cake of that together with political Islam. And they baked into their charter, the protocols of the Elders of Zion and Hitler's Mein Kampf. So we understand this is a totally anti-Semitic organization. It has today spread all over the Western world. It's prominent in Sweden. It goes under a different name. I think the United States of America has actually banned the Muslim Brotherhood, but I'm not sure. But they also go under a different name, and they are and they are very influential. So the Muslim Brotherhood is, of course, spreading anti-Semitism and Jew hatred and anti-Israelism as much as they can. So in summary, Judaism's place in Islam functioned as a counterpole, just as it did in Christianity for the early church. The state of Israel constitutes a theological threat that cannot under any circumstances be accepted, and hatred of Jews is built in to justify Islam. And the modern state of Israel is like a thorn in the side of the now politicized Muslim world. So that is in summary. So the next institutionalized Jew hatred is anti-Semitism as science. So we hated God because they killed God. We hated God because it threatens Islam. We hated Jews because they threatened Islam. And now we hate Jews scientifically. So when does this happen? So after the French Revolution, which is great, emancipation, people become independent, states are born in Europe in 1789. It also emancipated the Jews in 1791, two years after that. So all of a sudden, Jews who had been the lowest of the lowest, they had been God killers and they had been whatnot, discriminated against. You couldn't hear them or see them. They weren't allowed to make too much noise. All of a sudden, they are emancipated. So now Jews can go to universities, they can work in all kinds of different jobs they couldn't before, and you see them, they become visible in the streets. So this is met with very much suspicion, okay? So from being invisible, they suddenly became prominent. And when they were allowed they prospered. Because we also have to remember, Jews in history have always been literate. They could always read and write, which of course progressed in if they were allowed, they would always progress in their work. So the new situation was met with suspicion amongst the Germans, and their power, the Jewish power, was exaggerated. So now how are we going to do this? Well, we can't say that we hate them because they killed God, because this is now the Enlightenment time. People don't believe in God anymore. So what are we going to accuse them of? Well, they are the bearers of the Semitic language Hebrew, okay? That meaning the Jews, and there is an anti-movement created against the bearers of the Semitic language Hebrew. And that is mainly done by someone called Wilhelm Marr. And he created a political party called the League of Anti-Semites, because now we have the Semitic people who speak Hebrew. Now we are anti-Semitic. And now Semitism and anti-Semitism becomes a science. Perfectly fits into that part of history from the 17th century onward. And now they will also be talking later on about a Semitic race, when race ideology becomes prominent. So unlike the older sporadic spontaneous violence, hatred of Jews is now organized, it's systematic, it's a long-term struggle to limit the influence of the Jews, and it's an ongoing, when we talk about the race later, it's an ongoing race that was required constant agitation. So the linguistic change helped to legitimize and systemize the persecution, making them scientifically justified, culminating in the Holocaust. I mean, there is a science. This is the time when science becomes important. Darwin and the origins of the species, etc., etc. So here we have Semitism and anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism blossoms in eugenics, meaning the study of race. So racial biology placed Jews in a special category of foreign and less worthy. So this represented a racial break with earlier Christian beliefs, because in early Christian beliefs, you could convert. And if you converted and accepted Christ, you would be forgiven for being Jewish. Now you cannot do that, because it's racial. You're born with it. It's something you can never change. It's a virus that you can never do anything about. And remember, a virus has always it has to be fought with whatever means possible, okay? So being Jewish was a biological and permanent category. And anti-Semitism was completely unforgiving and far more deadly than the previous ones because of the virus. The virus can never be good. It must be fought, eliminated, and exterminated. And that is what Hitler actually based his ideology on. Next Jew hatred that is institutionalized is Zionism. So the term Zionism was coined by Nathan Birnbaum in 1890, same time as Herzl. And Zionism is, this is what it is, a national movement for the return of the Jews to their former homeland, Israel, and their independence and sovereignty in that same country. That is Zionism. Nothing about discrimination about others or anything. It's just the Jews return to their homeland and live there independently. But not only, of course. Sorry, I have to drink. So in 1948, 14th of May, sorry, thought I was Swedish now. Zionism was not just an idea, it became reality. And now Zionism is the creation of the state of Israel. Of course, then we have to have anti-Zionism. So anti-Zionism is directed against the existence of the state of Israel. Therefore, today it's politically correct that anti-Zionism functions as a cover for the politically incorrect hatred of Jews. I mean, you couldn't be a progressive today and say, I hate Jews. No, you can say, I hate Zionists. Now, when I was at a book fair in Sweden last autumn, I was accused of that, and I was harassed all over Sweden for my 5,000 kilometers that I traveled. I needed police protection. It's crazy. So you can speak of continuity. So this is the third major phase in Jew hatred. So first it was religious, then it was racial, biological, and today, in the progressive world of today, we have ideological, political anti-Zionism, but it's the same hatred. It's the hatred of Jews. Now, so Tsarist Russia, we need to talk about that because they had such great influence. So as we spoke before, the secret police, they wrote this book or pamphlet, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And it had a great influence on anti-Semitism at the time. And why was it written? Well, the Tsar had problems in Russia, and he wanted to divert discontent from the regime. He also needed a scapegoat, and what is better than to blame the Jews? And by blaming the Jews for being globalists and trying to take over the world, so he could legitimize the authoritarian rule of the Tsar, because now I'm chasing the Jews, and for that I need to have strong authority, strong police, strong etc. So it was the Jews' fault that all of the bad things that happened in Russia. Of course, 1917 there was a revolution, and the Soviet Union was created. And the Tsar was killed. Now, this makes Israel a game piece between East and West later on in politics after the Second World War. So after 1948, Israel became a pawn in the Cold War power game. Okay, Cold War between Soviet Union East and United States of America West. So Israel became the front state for the West, against Soviet influence, against the PLO, against the Arab world, so to speak. And this is a proxy war that goes on. It's not like Russia besides 1962. The Soviet Union would attack United States, but they would through proxies like terrorist groups, etc., etc. Now, if there is one thing that we should learn from the Soviet Union, which was a terrible, terrible communist dictatorship, it is propaganda. They were best in, and I think they still are the best. They are the best in the world in propaganda. They created a special department for the new ism, Zionology, where they studied Zionism and how to expose it and how to oppose it, etc., etc. And when people today use words such as Zionism, imperialism, and colonialism, it's considered legitimate criticism of the state of Israel, because this was brainwashed into the minds of the university students in the 60s and so forth, that colonialism, imperialism, and white power and all of this was because of the Jews. So that affected today's world greatly. Now, the Soviet Union, why is it so hard for the world today to actually look at this fairly simple truth and look it in the eye and deny it? Because for many, the Soviet Union was an ally against Hitler in the Second World War. Now, Hitler, we all know that Nazism was bad. No one can deny that. It's and if you are a Nazi today, you're not going to be taken seriously. But if you're a communist, you will be taken seriously, because the communists fought the Nazism. Now, Nazism is short for National Socialism, Nationalsozialismus in German. So socialism, I will say in general, socialism / communism / Marxism, this is what you see at the streets of university students. We saw that after October 7th in full-blown display in the West, in America also. So anti-Semitism today is disguised as anti-Zionism because we're against the Zionists that they were indoctrinated through the Russian Soviet Union empire. So the Arab League, the Soviet Union, PLO, and Yasser Arafat, they sort of work together as one. And it is they who created the Arab League, and the Soviet Union created the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, in 1964. So why? Because they needed a guerrilla warfare and they needed terrorism, and PLO could supply that. They needed propaganda techniques. So in the beginning, Yasser Arafat would go out and say, I'm going to kill all the Jews. I hate the Jews. I'm going to kill Israel. He was then sent to a course with Romania's Ceausescu dictator, and Ceausescu said, look, you cannot go to the UN and say that you hate all the Jews, you're going to kill all the Israelis. You have to say that you're a freedom fighter. You're fighting for let's see, you're fighting for a people called the Palestinians. Let's invent the Palestinians. And you are their freedom fighter. That's going to be good. And what are you fighting for? Against colonialism. Because why? The so-called people we call Palestinians, they had a land before. No one's going to care about the history. They're just going to listen to your fantastic words. And that's exactly what happened in 1975, 74, when Yasser Arafat, the arch terrorist in the world at the time, was invited to the UN and held a speech at the UN podium. It's in the General Assembly, and he was applauded. It's completely inconceivable, but that's what happened. And since then, it's been like a downhill for the West. And Israel is in this fight, trying its best to fight this off. So in 1975, after that, Zionism, the resolution 3379 was adopted in the UN that says Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. Talk about institutionalized Jew hatred. When the UN has it, United Nations has it, Eleanor Roosevelt would probably turn in her grave if she saw the UN today. It started so beautifully with such good intention, and it has been hijacked by terrible ideas. So the Soviet Union, conspiracy theories. This is another pamphlet that had a great influence. It was written by Sergei Sedov. Zionism counts on terror, meaning Zionism cannot exist without terror. Now, all of that taken into consideration, we have the oil-rich countries. And which are the oil-rich countries? It's the Arab and Muslim world. Now, the Muslim world, together with the communist world, China, Soviet Union, Russia, they sort of band together against the West, and this is a time when Africa, one country after another, is declaring independence from the colonial system. So it's anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, and all of that was the West accused of. And so Israel, of course, being created in 1948, or not created, declaring independence in 1948, was also a colonial state, an imperialist state accused of. Okay, so now the Arab world, they did something clever. They invested in education, in media, and diplomacy. And the price, or the result, is what we have today. Now, Palestine Liberation Organization, during the Oslo Accords, it was, this is a terrorist organization. And unfortunately, Israel bought into their lies that they said they want peace and so forth with Israel. And we signed the Oslo agreements. And since 1993-94, we have had nothing but terror. And the PLO today, the Oslo Accords created what we call the Palestinian Authority, who today is led by Mahmoud Abbas on his 25-year term out of a 4-year term. There should have been elections, but he has not held elections. So talk about a dictator. They are the only so-called entity that pays terrorists for murdering Jews. It's called pay for slay. They now claim that they don't have it anymore. They do. It's just called something else. And the more Jews you murder, the higher the salary. It's insane. And it's supported by the EU. It's supported by the UN. And the only ones actually blatantly opposing it is the United States of America. Today, President Donald Trump has talked about it. A few countries in the West, but not very many. So they think it's okay that you have an entity who says it's a country, which is it's not, that gives salaries to people who kill Jews. Now, in Durban in 2001, the UN organized a huge conference, Durban, South Africa. This is just a few years after South Africa has cast away the chain of apartheid, and it's now open and free, and people can come and visit this country. So they have this huge meeting where they're going to talk about, it's an anti-racist meeting. They talk about racism and what they're going to do about it. It turns out that this meeting organized by the UN was the most racist, violent, anti-Jewish meeting since the Holocaust, organized by the UN. Jews had to flee this conference during the conference because their lives were threatened. And since then, this created the BDS movement, boycott, divest, and sanction, meaning Israel, of course. And since then, they have been high at it, at boycotting, divesting, and sanction. And of course, what they mean, if we read the words of the actual creators of this movement, they want to erase the state of Israel. It's very, very open. Palestinianism, this is the new ism. And Palestinianism has become a kind of Western religion, progressive religion. And I say that because the West today says, oh, we're not religious. We don't believe in religion anymore. Religion is outdated. But if you anthropologically study humankind, there has always been beliefs and religion in humanity. It's kind of, some people call it, we have a gene, a religious gene in us. And there is no such thing as a human without a religion. So the new religion for the anti-religion people is Palestinianism. It has become like a religion. It makes them blind. They don't listen. They don't read about the truth. They don't care about the truth, and they're willing to kill for it. And it's kind of a salvation for all the young people of today who's looking for a cause, because when you're young, you're a university student or you're in high school, you want a cause. When I grew up, it was the children of Biafra. You had to make sure that you sent food to the children of Biafra. It was the Vietnam War, where we supported Vietnam. There were causes, clear causes in those days. All the struggles of Africa trying to throw off the shackles of the chain of colonialism. Today, we don't have that. Most countries are free today. Most countries are actually free to, even though they are dictators. So in the Muslim world, most of the countries, all of the countries are dictatorships, but it's their own free will to have that. So they're not occupied by someone like America or Sweden or Germany or whatever. It's something they have. So today, young people need another cause. And what is the best cause? What is the last colonial project according to them? Israel. And that's why Israel can never be right and always be correct, always be wrong. So jumping here, now we have. So this is institutionalized. This is institutionalized in the UN, in the ICC, in the ICJ, in the EU, which is a big organization globally. And I will be finishing very, very shortly. The new way of fighting Israel is with lawfare as opposed to warfare. So we fight Israel with the help of the law, and that's why the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, he could come out and say, the chief judge there, he could come out in front of television cameras and say, I am going to arrest, I'm going to put out an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And Yoav Gallant, who at the time was defense minister. Has never happened before. No other democratically elected leaders have ever been accused of what the two are accused of, which is starvation as a form of warfare and genocide, which I was accused of when I traveled around Sweden talking about anti-Semitism. I was accused of supporting genocide. It's insane. Then we have new organizations that are now trying to catch our soldiers. Now we have to remember to do the army service is obligatory in Israel. So that means any Israeli traveling abroad is out to be a potential target. And Hind Rayab Foundation, founded in 2024, does exactly that. Now one can wonder, where does all the money come from? Now I have an answer that I believe, but there is proof and to that also. And a lot of the money comes from Qatar and Iran, came from. Now, I don't know how much Iran is going to keep on giving money that they don't have. Qatar has lots of money. It's not a problem for them, but I don't know how they will be after this latest war. But Jew hatred is institutionalized and it's back on track as it has been again. Now, I just want to give you a little bit. Do I have 10 more minutes? Yeah. Okay, good. So these are examples from 2004. If we believe that the UN is just anti-Israel because of 7th of October, we're completely wrong. So I'm going to give you a few examples from 2004. So the Human Rights Council Working Group on Arbitrary Detention was elected from Iran. The Human Rights Council Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances was also from Iran. Now the UN Commissioner for Refugees was from Lebanon, Somalia, and Sudan. International Labour Organization, Saudi Arabia. International Labour Organization from Saudi Arabia. This is from 2004. The UN Security Council, Libya. Well, Iran was just voted into, but this is from 2004. Then we have the International Atomic Energy Agency General Committee, Vice Chair, Syria. Now remember, in 2007, Israel destroyed the nuclear power station that they had to build an atomic bomb in 2007. So this is 2004. They were high at it, building it, and they are put on a chair for the International Atomic Agency by the UN. United Nations Disarmament Commission, Vice Chair, Syria and Iran. I mean, you think it's a joke. You really think it's a joke. And I would love for the UN to follow its own charter. But for me, the UN is united nonsense and it should be dismantled. Not many people agree with me. And I think it should be a new organization that has, if you want to be a member of that organization, you have to be a democracy. I mean, how is it possible and that these countries they have history that is terrible, and they are sitting there in the UN and making decisions, because we must remember, out of the 193 members in the UN, most of them are not democratic. And the ones who are democratic, they will vote for the non-democratic because they need the oil. It's all about the money, by the way. Now, we have the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, China. Now, China today, also in 2004, have 1 million Muslims in camps they're called educational camps to re-educate them to be Chinese. 1 million. Not a word about that in the UN, not a word about that from the Muslim world. But when Israel kills one terrorist trying to kill a Jew in Samaria, it makes the headlines on the CNN and Christian Amanpour and whatnot. It's absolutely crazy. So the UN, now we come to the 7th of October and how the UN manipulated the information against Israel at all times. So they lied about the humanitarian aid, of course. I'm not going to go into the details. They are here on this chart. They missed to report 2/3 of the trucks that came in. 2/3, 6,000 out of 9,000 that came into the Gaza Strip between certain dates. The UN also organizes is the organization that most successfully spread hatred of Israel and Jews around the world. And I will stand for that. That is my opinion. For this, I was blocked on social media. And I'm still limited on social media because of this. When I say social media, it's actually Facebook. So the non-existent country of Palestine, because Palestine doesn't exist, was awarded by the UN observer status in 2012. Now, since then, and this is the reason we see so many resolutions against Israel, the only thing they have done nothing to improve their position in their own country, Palestine, that they call it. The only thing they do is to get anti-Israel resolutions. So nothing that will improve their own situation, only what will make Israel's situation worse. So the so-called country of Palestine is a country that is their raison d'être, their reason for breathing is to destroy Israel, not to build their own country. And that has to be very, very clear. So the only thing they've done is to delegitimize the very existence of the Jewish state of Israel. Now, it's not only, of course, the Arab Palestinians, it's the UN itself. And this person here, Martin Griffiths, he said in 2024, in the midst of the onslaught of the, in the midst of the onslaught of the Palestinians, Arab Palestinians on the Jews in Gaza, in that war, he said, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. They are a political movement. This is the UN. So no wonder that when people say, okay, but the UN says that there is a state called Palestine, but the UN says that the Hamas are freedom fighters. Yeah, that is one of the reasons that we should dismantle the UN, because they spread lies, and whatever reason they stand for, it's just appalling. It's just appalling. So that was Martin Griffiths. Now the Hamas charter, obviously he cannot read. He's illiterate. Hamas charter states that their goal is the annihilation of the Jewish state of Israel, and it's not compatible with Islam. It couldn't be clearer. Just read the charter. It's not very long. Now, the UN doesn't recognize Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, or the PFLP as terrorist organizations either. Of course, the United States does, even Sweden, my progressive Sweden, former country, does recognize some of these organizations as terrorist organizations. Now, UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agencies, it's a UN mandate, and of course, UNRWA doesn't recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization either, or the above mentioned. UNICEF, the beautiful organization that is supposed to take care of the children of the world, it has to protect the lives of children in 190 countries. Now, Arab Palestinian children from kindergarten and onwards are encouraged to become child soldiers, jihadists, taught to kill Jews, taught that Jews are not humans, and so on, under the auspices of UNICEF and UNRWA. So my question is this a conscious strategy to sacrifice the Arab Palestinian children in order to hate the Jews and to accuse Israel of shooting children when the jihadi indoctrinated children are murdering Israelis? Is anti-Semitism so institutionalized in the UN that even the Arab Palestinian children are sacrificed in the fight against the Jewish state of Israel? That is a question. My answer is yes. That is, I'm completely convinced. Now, I want just to explain something. When I started traveling, I was 18 years old when I took my backpack and became a backpacker and traveled around the world. I was a tabula rasa, meaning a blank slate. I had no preconceived ideas about anything, nothing. And when I was in Egypt, I got stuck in Egypt for a while in 1981. I had a little calendar, like a very small calendar. And at the end, in the beginning and the end of the calendar, there was like a world map. So it's really tiny. And I'm stuck in Egypt. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll just hitchhike. That's what I do. I hitchhike. I forgot to say I hitchhiked around the world. I can hitchhike through Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, no problem. That's how innocent I was. What I say today and what I lecture on today is my learned experience. I wasn't born into this. You know, I came from Sweden in the 70s and the 60s. It was peace on earth and we're all equal. I even chose to study French because I thought someday or another, I will go to Africa to help the children in Africa. And in Africa, they mainly speak French. And that's the reason I chose French as my third language in high school. And so what I say today, it sounds racist, it sounds extreme, but it's not. It's my lived and learned experience of what happened here. So 24 UN agencies are active in the so-called Palestine, and 3 of them are exclusively for the service of the Arab Palestinians. Okay, and they call themselves present in OPT, Occupied Palestinian Territory. Terrible. How can they even say that? They made it up. It's not occupied and it's not Palestinian territory. Now, the UNRWA, the organization that takes care of Arab Palestinian refugees, they started off with 726,000 registered. Out of them, it was only 350,000 that was actually refugees. They are today considered to be 5.9 million, probably 6 million by now, because they are the only organization in the world that enforces inherited refugee status. No other refugee has inherited status. You're a refugee for a year, for 2, and then you are integrated into the country you're in or the country you will move to, but you are not a refugee forever. So this is, again, discrimination by the UN on the Arab Palestinians. I'm going to skip the next one. Qatar Human Rights Council. Well, I spoke about the UN and what I think. So Qatar is now elected to the Human Rights Council. Qatar, they have slavery in Qatar. Women have no rights. And they are now elected onto that board between 25 to the 2027. EU is also bad. EU is trying to meddle into our national politics. And they do so by flooding our judicial system with lots and lots of, they try to sue the system. They have lawsuits and they flood the system. Now, Israel is so democratic that anyone can come here and file a lawsuit. I don't know of any other country that has that system, but that's how democratic we are. So they have flooded the system with thousands and thousands, more than 4,000 lawsuits per year through the EU. Now, the EU, of course, they're helping the Arab Palestinians to file a lawsuit. The EU will give the Arab Palestinians free legal help, meaning they will get a lawyer, they will get a defense defense lawyer. And the reason they do that is because they want to flood the system and then destroy our democratic system from within. They have been quite successful until the 7th of October. Finally, our government is waking up to this problem that they have ignored for such a long time. And I'm not even talking about settlement and illegal settlements and settlers. That's a completely, I'm happy to give a lecture on that because that's very enticing too. Now, the EU decided in 2019 that we need to go and, like the Nazis, the Jews had to wear the yellow star where it says Jude on it, Jew. So that's what they do on merchandise, which is produced in Judea and Samaria, which according to the EU's own standard is occupied territory. So they're back onto this anti-Semitic German Nazi trail. They have a secret plan that I was invited to the Swedish Parliament, and I spoke about this EU plan that where they actually want to take over Area C, which is part of Judea and Samaria. Sorry, I'm going to take a tablet. Which is part of Judea and Samaria, and just declare a Palestinian country without the consensus of Israel. Then we have non-governmental organizations. They're going, I already said, they're going after our soldiers. Amnesty International is also terrible. And this woman that you see here, I'm pointing at her. She works for Amnesty International. She reported this man who tried to have a Zoom meeting with Israelis. He didn't try, he had a Zoom meeting with Israelis that are searching for peace and cooperation. She reported him to Hamas. So he was, of course, in prison, tortured for years. And only thanks to the UN Watch, he was released a few years ago and now lives, of course, abroad, not in Gaza anymore. So Amnesty International lies. They have accused Israel for genocide and apartheid for many, many years. Media. So this was Stop Starving Gaza's Kids. During the Gaza war, of course, these were all false information. The children that they photographed, they were children who unfortunately were very sick, but they were not starving because of Israel. If they were starving, it was because of Hamas, but these children were actually sick. Now, media, we have something called Hollywood. Is when you Hollywood, so the Palestinian Hollywood, they create false media framing. So what you see here is Time magazine. They have this fantastic photo of all the people who are starving and hungry. And then on the other slide, you see that it's actually staged. And if you look at the first slide here, you can see there's a rail that is red and white. It's the same rail over here. And it's the same rail in this picture. It's the same rail in this picture here. All of these photos are staged. And Western media, or all media, Al Jazeera as well, of course, they will buy this and create it and present it as actual facts. I'm going to skip this one. Social media. I'm just going to give you an example. Social media is terrible. So some people say it's good, you can, but it has gone berserk. As I said, I'm being blocked from social media by Facebook because I believe that the UN is an anti-Semitic organization. During the Corona epidemic, hate in time of the Corona. If you have COVID-19, if you have the bug, give a hug, spread the flu to every Jew. Holocaust. How disgusting is that? And I just want to end with a few words by J.K. Rowling, who is the author of the Harry Potter books. She wrote the following on Twitter. If you believe free speech is for you, but not for your political opponents, you are illiberal. If no contrary evidence could change your beliefs, you're a fundamentalist. If you believe the state should punish those with contrary views, you're a totalitarian. And if you believe political opponents should be punished with violence or death, you're a terrorist. Now, personally, I have been, when I visited Sweden, and I traveled through all of Sweden, actually, from the north to the south, 2,500 kilometers back and forth, I needed police protection. So I will say, if you believe the state should punish those with contrary views, you're a totalitarian. That's the situation in Sweden right now. And people who have contrary views, they endanger their lives, their families. My family was also threatened. So they had to go underground. In Sweden. Now, I grew up in Sweden being very, very proud of a liberal country, democracy, equality. It was a welfare state for kids. It was fantastic to grow up in Sweden as a child in the 60s and the 70s. And they are on their own, turning against themselves. It's their choice. It's unbelievable to see what, it's so sad, so upsetting to see what they do willingly with their former beautiful, fantastic, probably one of the best countries in the world to grow up in the 60s and the 70s. And they have turned it into what it is today. And I thank you for this. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. It actually became very blatant after 1973, the Yom Kippur War with the Arab world and Israel, where there was what we call the oil crisis, and then they realized that they could actually pressure the West into submission, which is name of Islam, submission. If you want to have our oil, you want our energy. And in those days, wind energy and other types of energy were not yet available. Oil was the only source of energy, maybe water. They said, you can get it, but we need something in return. We need to send professors to the universities. You need to educate your students about Islam in a positive way. You need to stop promoting Israel. You need to start being more negative about Israel. It wasn't very obvious. It was very slow. And as you said, their trademark, the Arab world's trademark, is patience. And they never forget. They never forget or forgive, by the way. So, amen to that. I will definitely. And I wish you all a good evening and a good year, and that we will eventually have some fruitful peace. Not just peace, fruitful peace. Thank you very much.